Today, we're talking about wiring. Now, wiring is one of those things where a lot of people actually don't take the time to learn it or are scared to learn it because they're scared of burning down the car. Full disclosure, I definitely was one of those people and still sort of am one of those people, but no matter where your knowledge starts or ends in the wiring world, companies like Chassis Harness exist to help people like you and me out so that we can get our cars wired up and on the track.
Welcome to Mastering Every Turn, where my goal is to turn my BMW E36 into a multi-motorsport machine. I plan on competing in drifting, rally events, hill climb racing, drag racing, and much more, all with this one car.
So in today's episode, I'm going to install this $2,000 chassis harness in my E36. We're going to talk about if it's worth it. Should you be spending your money on a chassis harness like this, or should you just go and build one yourself? Let's go find out.
Now, whether you're making your own chassis harness or just buying one, we need to figure out what we're putting in the car in the first place. Now, I could easily make a 10-hour-long video explaining how in super detail the entire electronic system of a car works, but we're going to try and wrap this up in about a minute, so bear with me. Now, like I said, we're going to keep this super simple. For starters, every car needs a battery, obviously. You got to get the juice to everything else in the system somehow. Now, leaving the battery, you're going to have a super thick gauge wire. Typically, this wire is going to go to a power distribution block of some sorts in the car, so that way all the other systems in the car can get powered up just by bolting to this one block. Now, super important, in between the battery and the power distribution block, most tracks or racing leagues actually require you to have an emergency cutoff switch for your electrical system. So that way, in the case of an emergency, somebody on the outside of the car can reach in, flick the switch, and nothing else in the car will have juice other than the battery and the little bit of cable leading to that switch. Now, anything past that power distribution block is going to be where the real chassis harness build begins. All the different components in your car, like your headlights, any sort of digital display, or even complex systems like a motorsport ABS system, all need to have their own powered circuits, and that's where something like a fuse box comes in. Normally in a race car, your fuse box gets its main power supply from something like a power distribution block. Now, no matter what circuit you're dealing with in the car, whether it's a fuel pump you need to switch on and off, or a fan you need to switch on and off, you need a way to switch these things, and that's where, funny enough, a switch panel comes into play. Now again, I just want to reiterate the fact that this is a super duper high level explanation of how the wiring is laid out in a race car. Again, this isn't really an explanation, but instead more of a graphic to help you understand how the electronic systems of a race car interact with each other.
So now we understand how all the different electrical systems in a race car work together. The next biggest thing on everybody's mind is how much is it going to cost you, the viewer, to put a chassis harness or make your own chassis harness for your race car. Now, it's pretty safe to say that there's about 3 ranges of chassis harnesses in the DIY world, and where you're going to fall totally depends on what level your race car's at. Level 1 would be that old vintage style cup car. All you have to really worry about is your starter and a few other odds and ends in that engine harness to just give it power and you're good. Most of these guys are going to be spending somewhere between $400 to $600 is a pretty good safe range on all the materials it's going to cost to get that car just through tech. Again, no crazy extra features, just bare minimum. I want to go out on the track in my old vintage car. Level 2 will be something closer to what my E36 is and most of the cars out on the racetrack. You're going to be a step above that vintage car where you're adding in a bunch of other features, things like digital dash, possibly motorsport ABS, and all those other things will obviously add up the more you stack in your car. Now, the other big factor is, again, things like engine connectors, other OEM body connectors. If you're maintaining your stock lights, you want to go to an engine harness to feed the ECU, to feed all that. All these connectors add up and they're pretty hard to come by. A pretty safe range if you want to go do your own research, but most of them will be somewhere between $1,500 to $2,000 in materials by the time you're fully done. If you want to have, again, working windows, all that stuff, and you want to have a really nice quality harness, you're going to spend somewhere between $1,500 to $2,000, maybe a little bit lower than $1,500. But at that point, depending on your build, you might be cutting corners at anything less than that. Now, the third type of harness that you can get into is the above and beyond. I'm just maxing out my credit cards. I want to go balls to the wall. A very good example of that, and one of the people that I look up to, is Rob Dom. He makes amazing wiring harness videos. They're hours long. He has tons of information on what to do, what not to do, great schematics and everything. But with this high tech also comes high price tags. He has spent $14,000 on for him, a pretty mediocre harness that he was very happy with, but he could push it past that. And then a more recent video, he actually put in $40,000 into a chassis harness. Absolutely mind-boggling. But again, that's using top-of-the-line equipment. That's Haltech body control modules, all sorts of stuff to really fine-tune, diagnose, and really tune that chassis harness to exactly what he wants. Again, he's also using Premier connectors, Premier wire, everything almost at the top of the line. You know, you can really go down the rabbit hole when it comes to wiring up a chassis harness.
So let's get into why I decided to have a chassis harness made for me instead of just building one myself. The first thing is the amount of time it takes to make a chassis harness. Not a lot of people talk about it, or the people that do talk about it are, you know, obviously professionals. This stuff takes time. When you're learning, drawing up a proper schematic, understanding how all the systems have to interact with each other, and then also making secure and safe connections at every point on the harness that aren't going to short, etc., etc. The amount of time it takes to do that as a beginner, it's totally worth it when companies like Chassis Harness exist, that for only a few $100 more than putting in your materials, you can have a fully custom tailored chassis harness for your car. Now, the next big reason is weight. Obviously in a race car, every pound matters. So when it comes to shaving off some lbs in the old race car, this is one easy way to do it. A factory E36 engine harness is an absolute rat's nest, weighing in right around 40 to 50 pounds. Now, as you can see on the screen, the chassis harness is going to weigh right in around 10 pounds, which is a huge weight savings over that 50 pounds of the stock harness. And again, this one's pretty optioned out, but I'm pretty confident in saying that no matter how many options you add to your chassis harness, you'll definitely be in at less weight than your OEM chassis harness that you take out of your car.
So hands down, one of the biggest reasons you would want to go and purchase your own chassis harness, for example, is that everything that you order can be custom made to your specific car.
Now you can see here, chassis harness lays out every single wire for you, letting you know exactly what wire does what when you custom order it for your car. And they make it super easy to run it through the car. They have a front harness, a main harness, and a rear harness. Again, each one you can pick what goes where. Now, regarding the front of the car or my front portion of the harness, there's not a lot up here right now that I can show you because we're still trying to get the car started. We still need to get things mapped out where they need to be. So there's not a ton, but the big thing I want to show you is this, is that working with companies like Chassis Harness or any other high-end reputable custom racing harness company, they can source really rare OEM plugs. For example, this BMW engine harness plug. This is the engine harness plug, or the X20 plug from BMW. Now, it's a circular connector. It's got a bunch of pins on the inside, and all the wires from the engine harness and all the powers for the starter, everything, have to go through this plug. So again, the reason that's so huge is that for somebody like you or me that doesn't have access to these awesome plugs on the ready, these companies keep them in stock. So if you wanted to do something like I did, where I want to maintain my factory engine harness in use with a custom racing chassis harness, I can do that. Again, because Chassis Harness stocks these things, they can pin it all out, make it work exactly with the engine harness, and it saves you and me a ton of time because we don't have to figure out these pin outs, send all the wires where we need to send them. It's all done for you. So that's a huge time saver and a really nice big convenience factor. Now that we're inside the car, I can kind of chat about all the different features that are in my chassis harness for the main harness portion of the car. Now, I really like their little fuse box. I like that it was tucked up under the dash in my old car, and I wanted to replicate that in this E36 as well. So I opted to have them place it right here so that I can kind of screw it into where the ECU box is on the car. I can bolt everything together, everything nice and compact, up against the body of the car, super stable. The next big cool thing about the chassis harness is that they can custom map you out multiple switch panels or a switch panel depending on what you need in your car. Now, as you can see, I actually got rid of the factory key. I modified my steering column so that everything still maintains and uses the factory bearings, but I don't have a key here anymore. Now, obviously that's a huge deal because I still need a way to start my car. So they made a really sweet switch panel where I have factory ignition, as if you would if you went to accessory in your car, and then I can hit the power button to flip over the starter and hopefully get everything cranking here. I had to take a quick moment and throw on this beanie. It is getting pretty cold this time of year, but with that aside, I wanted to see if we can get this thing cranking over. Now, like I said before, Chassis Harness makes it super easy with the actual X20 plug. Everything comes through to, you know, send signal to the starter that I'm trying to crank it over. Over here, starter and the rest of the harness is getting power from the distribution block. So in theory, this thing should just crank over. So I guess let's go give it a shot. So our little startup segment here, we got the kill switch, the master kill switch, ignition on. Now, like I said, this is what actually sends, you know, the signal to the starter, allowing everything to actually work. So how Chassis Harness did it for me is that this needs to be on kind of at all times to work, you know, really anything in the harness. Like I said, it's like hitting accessory. Anyway, we got the Power Tune Digital Dash coming on. That is a good sign. Everything here is getting power. So yeah, let's see if it cranks over. Oh yeah. Perfect. Little kill switch here. Boot everything down, not kill that. There she is. It feels so good to hear the motor cranking over. Obviously, cranking a car is the first step to getting it started. You know, we're still missing fuel and spark and everything, but again, that's gonna come in the next episode where we actually get this car started up. So now, let's head to the back of the car. We'll get the rear harness all wired in. Okay, so we are officially in the last section, or the rear section of the chassis harness. Now, as I mentioned before, in the front of the car, there is not a lot that I can actually plumb right now, wiring-wise, because we still need to get a few things tied into the car before we get it all wired up. One of those things is this fuel cell here. We have to actually get it in, as well as do a lot of the fuel pump wiring. But again, it is nice that they have this flying lead here. It's on its own relay and fuse. All I gotta do is run the power in the ground right to the fuel pump. Everything will work as it should. Now, regarding the taillights, as you can see right now on the screen, we have working hazard lights, we have working running lights. The only things you're gonna have to take my word on right now are the brake light and the reverse light, because I do not have a brake pedal on the car and I do not have any shift linkage to get this thing into reverse right now, but I promise they do work. Now, like I said, everything is still a little bit of a mess. We've got droopy wires hanging, and again, this is just what, you know, kind of the R&D process of building a race car looks like. We got to get all the panels in. Everything will kind of be tucked in, you know, last second, but for now, this is how it's going to look until we get the car running and we officially know it's, you know, ready to go. Then we'll do all the pretty work, tucking in all the wires. But like I said, for now, it's looking pretty good. We got lights and I'm super stoked on it. All right, so now that we've officially talked about building harnesses and reviewing what I got in this $2,000 chassis harness, the final question is it worth it to put it in your race car? In my opinion, the answer is yes. Like I said before, the amount of time that I saved having them custom build me one with all the proper connectors that plug right in, very minimal soldering on my end that I had to do, knowing that all the connections are secure, safe, and most importantly, reliable, so that way out on track, I'm not dealing with wiring issues on something that, you know, I forgot to pin or I loosely pinned it in and now I'm backtracking issues at the track. That's the last thing I want when I have so many other things to worry about at the racetrack. Now again, getting into cost, let alone how much time you save, you really don't save that much money building your own harness anymore. Unfortunately, wiring is super duper expensive. The connectors and the actual wire itself, it might seem a little ridiculous at first, but if you actually were to price out wiring, to buy it in bulk is what will save you money in the end. But if you end up going that route where you buy everything in bulk, the only way you're going to ever use it is if you make multiple harnesses and then you want to try and make money. And if you're going to do that, totally worth it. But otherwise, like I said, it'll probably end up being cheaper in the long run to just go with chassis harness and have them make you something, again, that's perfectly custom to your car, every connector where you want it. Like I said, it saves you so much time, so much money, totally worth it. All right, everybody, that's going to wrap up the video here. I super appreciate you guys taking the time to watch it. I really hope you learned something in this video, and if you didn't, I hope you at least found it entertaining. Stick around to the next video where we actually get this thing fired up. I'm so happy we were able to get it cranking in this video. Again, big shout out to Chassis Harness for making that super simple. But like I said, we need to get this thing started, and that is coming next. So with a lot out of the way, I hope you guys subscribe, stick around to the next video. Like I said, I cannot wait to get this thing actually running and driving. As always, if you have any comments or questions or anything, I try and reply to every single comment underneath each video. So like I said, anything you have, leave it down below and make sure you like it. It really helps out the videos. I'm trying to get these videos out to more people. So even if you enjoyed it or learned anything and you want to share it to a friend, I would greatly appreciate it. Lastly, make sure you go check out the other videos in this series. Last time we got the safety equipment installed in the car. We picked out the engine in the next video, talked about why we decided to even keep the stock motor in the first place and turbo it. All that information and more is in those other two episodes, so make sure you go check those two out. But like I said, other than that, I will see you guys in episode 4, where we get this thing officially started up and running. Peace.